Well, my fellow get-gooders, this game got high praise from what I had seen, so I became really interested in checking it out, despite the disappointment that was Dying Light 2. Now, granted, I played that game when it first came out, and I heard that Techland had made some changes to it to bring it more in line with Dying Light 1, but I actively disliked Dying Light 2, primarily for the story, which I felt was so bad that I was riffing on it as it played out, like a stand-up comedian doing crowd work. It's an example of a game where the story can negatively affect what is otherwise good gameplay because you're forced through the story in order to unlock parts of the game that you like. I was so disappointed that I went back to play Dying Light for the millionth time to see if I remember that game differently, and it was just me who didn't like DL2, but I started playing it again with the intention of playing for a few hours, and then I ended up going through like 75% of the game because I had such a good time playing it. So I decided to check out the Beast. I heard it was more in line with DL1, and I had heard that the reviews, or I'd seen that the reviews were higher than I expected. So I love zombie games in general. I really liked Dead Island 1 in 2011. I mean, that game was greatly flawed, but it was still a lot of fun. And Dead Island Riptide I enjoyed, but to a lesser degree. And that game was supposed to be DLC that got turned into a full game, which apparently was the case with the Beast. So let's get to the questions and break down this new entry. The questions for casuals are a series of questions for us, sounds like a skill issue, folks who don't have a lot of time, money, high-end equipment, so we can break down the games we play from a casual's perspective. They're basically broken down into three types: specific things about the game like visuals, audio, etc., some more casual focused questions, and then more contemplative questions about the game. If you like, dislike, or have questions you want to see, leave them down below in the comments. And as usual, this is my unedited, uninterrupted gameplay, my mistakes and all, which I feel is the best way to show some of the nuance in the game instead of just chopping it up into the exciting parts. I believe it will show you things in the gameplay that you won't see in edited footage. So let's get to question number one. What is the best thing about this game? The best thing about this game is the tension it creates. The feeling of needing to make that next jump to dodge and avoid that zombie group, making sure you're not getting surrounded and trying to make it to a safe house before the sun goes down, creeping through the streets at night, trying to avoid volatiles, and then running through the streets like a maniac when you get spotted, trying to quickly plan out your route to get to safety. The beginning of Dying Light 1 was great at this because you didn't have a skill set yet. The tension of trying to make it through the streets and get out of harm's way, but then eventually getting more experience and getting skills in combat and parkour, creating that power creep where you're able to now mad dash and leap off zombies and you're launching from rooftops to roll onto the ground and bash your way through crowds. That's what this series has always done really well. That feeling of going from having that survival horror experience and then slowly transitioning into a place where you're like a powerhouse and you're just a force running through the streets and chopping zombies' heads off. It's a great feeling that this game has too, but to a lesser degree, which leads us to: what is the worst thing about this game? Question number two. The worst thing about this game is that almost everything feels a little less good than Dying Light 1. There are improvements in visuals and combat, but the skills are very familiar, and the beast skills, where Kyle can activate his Roid Rage and turn into a monster, is cool, but it isn't something that you can consistently utilize, and they essentially add the skills you normally have to beast mode. Now you can use the grappling hook in beast mode. Now you can drop attack in beast mode. Now you can charge in beast mode. Stuff like that. It's all so familiar. The story is not as good as Dying Light 1's was, and the characters aren't as interesting either. The setting isn't as good as Haran, and therefore the parkour feels less good as well, as it just felt like it had no flow to it. I was constantly coming across gaps and not finding pathways that felt like I wasn't able to go in the direction I wanted. When the defining feature of your series feels less good than previous entries, that's a pretty problematic situation you've got. Question 3. What is the most visually impressive part of this game? This is a good looking game overall, but specifically the distant environment is very impressive. For example, I was sitting on a rooftop and I was looking at these structures, where I wanted to go next, and the views of the surrounding countryside are really beautiful from high on up off the ground. But then I started to get a sense of dread because the sun started to go down behind the mountains. And that contrast is such a great visual cue that provides you with the feeling that the game is trying to evoke from you. I don't know if that scene I experienced was an intentional design, like coming out of the vault in Fallout. It's just probably organic just from the overall design, but it certainly delivered on what the developers were trying to convey. That feeling I got was completely provided by the visuals, and it certainly is impressive. Question 4. How good is the sound design, voice acting, and music in this game? The sound design, as usual, is excellent in Techland's games. You know, weapons stun and slash, the zombies growl and distant screams. It gives the game atmosphere, adds to the tension. Sound design is important in games like this, specifically for that atmosphere, and Techland has always done this well. Voice acting is not bad, but it's not standout. It's not, Dead Island 1 bad, but it's not something that is like, oh, this is good. The main guy who plays Kyle Crane, he's good, but that's about it. The music is also good. Dying Light always had good menu music, though, just as stated before, it's just a step below Dying Light 1, the Beast menu music. But the music overall, there's lots of chunky guitar riffs when things heat up, when you're driving, when you're doing parkour, you can hear it start to, crank up. It's a noticeable quality that adds to the game. I think, in fact, the music is probably one of the best qualities this game has. It's very good. How does this game control, and is there a preferred method? The game controls relatively well. I still find that Crane doesn't do what I want him to do a lot of the time. He won't grab that ledge or that pipe. He'll bump up against it and he'll fall to his death. Or he won't grab something he should. He'll slide and flip around. It's pretty frustrating sometimes, and it feels more commonplace in this game than other ones, according to my memory. I also don't love that on a controller, the X button essentially does like three things. It activates nearby traps, it searches bodies and containers, and it heals. It also pulls out your weapon. So a lot of the time I'm not doing what I want to do. It's like pulling out a weapon when I'm trying to search, but then I'm trying to heal. It's a little bit confusing. I know the options allow for keyboard and mouse button mapping, but they do not for a controller, which I think is the preferred method here due to the amount of melee fighting that's happening in this game. However, a keyboard and mouse could be more beneficial due to having remappable controls, and it would probably help with range combat. I mean, that's an easy one. A mouse is always better for range combat, but you're not doing that a lot in this game. It feels more tactile to me also. Having a controller in your hands for doing parkour and melee fighting, that's just me, but it does feel better. Which gameplay system is the most impressive and which is the most underwhelming in this game? Question number 6. I think the combat is the most impressive system. It really feels good in this game, and chopping and hacking these zombies up looks better than ever. It doesn't go as far as the flesh system in Dead Island 2, but you can really chop them up, and it's just awesome, and it's fun. The core gameplay loop in this series, it's still there, and it's still very entertaining. You're running around, hopping over walls, kicking zombies halfway down the street, then chopping their heads off. It's just a blast. The least impressive, though, is the crafting and the economy systems. We've basically been seeing the crafting system and weapon mod. We've been seeing the same crafting and weapon mods for almost 15 years now, with minor tweaks. And it needs to be overhauled. And I'll get into that a little bit later. But the economy was meaningless. I always had money. I never really wanted to buy anything. It was mostly crafting parts, which is boring, like rags and cans. When you have too much money and there's nothing to buy and the stuff that you want to buy is not interesting, there's something wrong. Question number 7. Does this game have a solid narrative or is it filled with plot holes? The story in this game is basically a series of boss fights, and I can't stand boss fights to begin with. So, Kyle Crane is back and he's pissed because some evil scientist called the Baron has been torturing him to try and turn him into a controlled monster weapon, and he escapes and he plots his revenge. That's the basic story. With help from another scientist, he can act on his revenge plot, so she assigns him the homework of fighting bosses because fighting bosses is about as fun as doing homework. Is there anything more antiquated in modern video game design than the boss fight? The dodge, attack, then run up for 2 hits, then run away, dodge attack, run up for 2 hits, rinse and repeat until he's dead. Not only is this every boss fight in this game, but the bosses are almost all variations of the same types of enemies you already see in the game, and you end up fighting multiple of the same boss type towards the latter part of the game. None of it is interesting, none of it is all that fun. There could have been an interesting story where Kyle is changing and he can't control his anger and taste for revenge, where he starts to scare or affect those around him, when he's trying to build up this force to fight the Baron, where the monster's coming out and he can't control it. The side characters you meet aren't interesting. There's really no emotional connections created. And in addition to the boss fight homework, there's various MacGuffin type things that you need to get so that you can complete your revenge plot. Like, oh, go get this thing because we need this to do that. It feels meaningless. It doesn't feel like it's required. You could tell it's almost like they're just adding it to pad the plot or move the plot along. The side missions I played were uninteresting. They told basic stories about, lost lovers and estranged fathers, and small stories are okay, but small stories work best in these games when they also tell big stories, in the sense that they reveal something about the game world or the narrative being told. Having them be basically one-off small vignettes with no additional expansion of the greater world or narrative, it's a big miss here. It feels like a story from the developer's B team that would be in a DLC or something. And oh wait, that's what this game was supposed to be. Dying Light's story was not great either. I feel like people have their rose-colored scuba goggles on for that game story, but it wasn't bad by any means, and it was miles better than Dead Island's. There's so much here to nitpick as far as plot holes, but this story is so underwhelming, so why waste time on pointing out the utter ridiculous of some of the cutscenes and plot points? Just classic tropes like the bad guy talking about his whole plot in front of everyone, where the guy who could turn into a massive beast just has his hands tied behind his back and can't break out of it. He's got no guards in there. See, I'm doing it. I'm gonna stop. Question number 8. How does this game rank as a casual experience? So firstly, I want to say that I found this game to not really be hard. It's certainly not an easy game like Warhammer 40k was, but I found it to be pretty frustrating at times. A combination of finicky controls mixed with boss fights, high tension situations, that's not a good mix. I played on normal, and while the majority of the game is definitely not hard, I did find myself yelling at the screen a couple times like I'm 6 years old again. You know, there's a story mode that you could play which would ease the frustration as well as the tension if that's something that would bother you. And you could also pretty much avoid night at all times by sleeping at a safe house just like in Dying Light 1. On a side note about the nighttime, it was fun in DL1 for a while, but I ended up avoiding it for the most part in that game until I got stronger. It is fun, but it ended up feeling more gimmicky as the series went on, and in the Beast, having more open countryside to explore made it difficult to navigate those areas without coming across a lot of volatiles. It just wasn't as much fun, and I pretty much avoided it all the time. You're going to have to make, I think, an executive decision here on whether or not you're willing to sacrifice the tension and power creep, which is one of the best things about this game, in order to have a less frustrating experience. The boss fights are not bad early on, but they increasingly become more frustrating, and the final boss fight was one of the worst boss fights in recent memory, though I think at that point I had come so far but wanted the game to be over already that I was just more frustrated than normal. Again, I wouldn't say that these are overly difficult fights, they're pretty basic, but I just found them to be so devoid of fun that I just wanted them to be over. I would say that if you're a casual player like me, be aware that this game has its pain points, and playing on story might be worth it if you want to have as little resistance as possible, though that resistance is required in order to have that survival horror-ish experience. Keep that in mind. Question 9, is the amount of content in this game acceptable, and is it worth the purchase price? I bought this game at its full price of $60, and I have to say I regret it. Look, it's not $70, it's not $80 like some games will be, thanks Nintendo, and it shouldn't be either of those prices considering it was supposed to be DLC. This is 100% wait and play other stuff until this game is on sale, unless you're a big Dying Light fan like me, and you can't wait to play it, then I say do it, but then you'll regret it, like me. So I highly recommend waiting for a sale, and if you're casual like me, you have a hefty backlog of games to play, because $30 or $40 is a better price for this game. I will say on a positive note here that I saw some time frames that other people were beating the game in, and a common complaint is that it's too lacking in content, but for us casuals, I think this will take longer than other people, and there's probably a good 50 to 60 hour experience here if you want to complete everything. So if you do want to pay a full price, you might have a decent amount of content here if you end up having more fun than me. Question number 10, at what point do you start to feel fatigued with this game, if at all? You know, I didn't get fatigued as early as I thought I would, to be honest. You know, after my third boss fight, I was wondering about whether or not I wanted to continue, but combat and parkour in this game is just great fun, and running around the world, jumping into dark zones, and unlocking safe areas is still fun. And you still get that power creep feeling as you upgrade equipment and unlock skills. It wasn't until the end of the story that I started feeling like I wanted it to end. The stuff I mentioned that was fun, well, they were fun in 2 previous games, and they're relatively unchanged here. So by the end of the story, which is around 28 hours for me, I started to get that feeling like, you know, been here, done that with these things, and they started feeling familiar more quickly. Question number 11. What games are coming out that could take your attention away from this game? Honestly, there's nothing really coming out that's similar to this game or is so massive that you'll have to drop this game to play it. I mean, I guess you can make an argument for Black Ops 7 and the zombie mode in that game, and while I had some fun with that mode in previous games, it's just not something I gravitate towards, so it's not on my radar. Question 12. Does this game need more support, or was it supported well? This game has been supported pretty well, I have to say. They had consistent updates, and they just dropped a new Game Plus mode with additional XP rewards, new legendary gear. It is a buggy game. There were a lot of visual things like floating objects, enemies getting stuck in the environment, and I swear that button presses would not register sometimes. I'm playing on PC with a controller. I don't know if that's unique to that particular setup, but it did happen. But speaking of my PC, I played this game on my 5-year-old PC on medium settings, which were high for my PC, and it ran like a dream. And it didn't make my CPU sound like it was going to shit its pants like every Unreal 5 engine game, so this game was very well optimized. Question number 13. Any controversial takes or pet peeves concerning this game? There's two controversial takes here. One, get rid of the grappling hook. Look, I know, alright, hear me out, because I love that thing too, but it essentially breaks the game in a couple ways. You can hook enemies and drag them to you, and when you unlock the head stomp skill, you could just repeat this over and over to instantly kill enemies. It turns the combat into a more shallow experience because I was always looking to do that in some way. It could also aid in parkour for sure, but the parkour in this series is one of its unique features, and relying on a piece of equipment kind of takes away from that experience a little bit. Second controversial thing, get rid of driving. This I don't think is as controversial. It requires a more open world so you can drive, and this takes away dramatically from the parkour experience. Driving literally takes away from it because you don't have to do it, and the environment is designed in such a way that there's more space and parkour doesn't feel as fluid because you come across large gaps. My pet peeve is obvious boss fights. Nothing more needs to be said, although let me add that mundane open world activities that developers feel they need to add to games to pad content is really starting to annoy me. Does every open world need to have like races, the hidden collectibles? Some ingenuity needs to be implemented when it comes to these side activities in open world games. Question number 14. Should this game either be single player or multiplayer or have both? This game should be multiplayer and is. It has co-op, which is as far as it should go. Dying Light 1 had PvP, which was a decent experience, but I'm guessing it wasn't too popular or the developers weren't happy with it because they didn't add it in further games. I think co-op is good enough for this game. Having two players running around with each other is fine. More would make the game either too chaotic or easy. Just know that if you're looking for an experience closer to a survival horror and you want to experience that immersive tension, that stress and anxiety, having another player with you will take away from that, definitely. Question 15, should this game have a prequel, sequel, or remaster? I think this game should have a sequel because I love the first game so much, but they are going to have to innovate with the next game because if they don't do this, this game series is going to end up like Assassin's Creed. It's not going to keep people interested if it's the same experience every single time. Question number 16. What innovations did this game introduce, refine, or popularize? I don't think this game did any of these. It introduced nothing new. It didn't refine its parkour, which is the main thing the series popularized. I think it's a bit more unreliable. The setting doesn't work well for it, and nothing new is added to it, so that's that. Question 17. How does this game compare to others in its genre? The zombie subgenre of video games is interesting because there are so many variations of it. There's more survival realistic like Project Zomboid. Side note, there's an interesting early access game that's a first-person version of that game called Vane. I think it's $20 on Steam right now, but it's in early access. There's also the survival sim experience like State of Decay. And then there's the action-focused games like Dead Island or Dying Light, I think that Dying Light 1 might be one of the best zombie games of all time. I was just thinking about this the other day. I can't really think of another one that I had more fun with. Maybe Dead Rising 2 or the original Dead Island. Zombies are such perfect fodder for video games. That's why there's so many of them and so many different types of them. And Dying Light 1 really sticks out as one of the best. Question number 18, how was this game received by the broader gaming community? So the reason I wanted to play this game was because it appeared to me that it was very well reviewed, and that was surprising to me. So I was like, man, I gotta have to check this game out. But on further review for this question, basically both the game critics and the gamers themselves feel pretty much the way I do about this game, though it does appear to be liked by fans of the series a little bit more, especially, more than Dying Light 2. I still don't think it's better than Dying Light 1, but it is better than 2, and I had more fun with it than I did with 2. Anyway, the consensus appears to be, this game is fun, but, this, and this is not great. The 3 Fs, fun, but flawed and familiar. Question number 20, what games would you recommend if you enjoyed this game? I'd recommend Dead Island 2, if you really like this game. It's a shorter experience, and though it's not made by Techland, it's based on design they created. I found that game to be an average experience. It was the first one that I reviewed, so you might like it or you may be left bored with it. I was left bored with it. I'd also recommend the Dead Rising remake if you're interested. That was a really fun game back in the day, and the remake kind of updates the visuals and stuff. The timed mode might turn you off. It turned me off as a casual. Just look into that before you buy it. It's kind of like a roguelike as your experience carries over, but you have certain times where you can complete objectives, and overall you have 72 in-game hours to do what you want before you have to start another playthrough. So just be aware of that if you want to play that game. Question number 21. What is the main theme or takeaway from this game? The main takeaway here is that familiarity breeds irrelevance. If they do not innovate and fundamentally change up some of the gameplay systems in this series, they're going to end up losing their audience over time. Why can't Dark Zones be more dungeon-like experiences with objectives inside? Like, I have to turn the power on to unlock this area. They don't all have to be long experiences, but they can't be the same experience with a lot of the same layouts. Stealth around, take out the screamers, rinse and repeat. Why can't I find lootable objects in the world, break them down into components I can craft with, and then build my own weapons and armor? Why couldn't Kyle have the ability to control zombies similar to another character, adding a new way to engage with combat or cause distractions for stealth gameplay? Parkour, combat, and stealth, they need new skills added to keep them fresh. Nighttime needs either additional enemies or more unique content specifically available during night to make it more desirable to engage with. Techland is going to have to commit to taking some risks here. They did so with Dying Light. They combined a zombie action game with refreshingly unique traversal mechanics. They went a little bit too far with Dying Light 2, where their eyes were bigger than their stomach, and they have course corrected a little bit here with The Beast, where the series does feel closer to the first game, but it doesn't do anything new here. And that is the major problem with this game. They're going to have to take some risks. So with that said, in conclusion, I like providing review scores for games. It's a nice way to sum up your thoughts, but the various game review systems that review sites have, they've always bothered me. They're always so broad that so much of it became meaningless. And I always found that the film review system, I found it to be easy and to understand and apply. So Dying Light, The Beast, is a 2.5-star game. It's an above average game. You have something here that while the core gameplay loop is still a blast, there isn't much of anything new here to offer players, and while the fun is still there, it's an experience that I think a lot of players are going to put down after they finish and never pick it back up, or get maybe halfway through and just say, okay, I've seen what this game is, and there's nothing left for me. And that's an experience that is such a far distance from the great Dying Light 1. And finally, just at the end here, for the highly embarrassing self-promotion, please please subscribe, and share. Share your thoughts, your questions, your answers to the questions below, and I'll catch you get gooders in the next one.